Okay, so I think we can start our journey today. Meanwhile, somebody might still join, but we slowly start with framing the day, and as you can read, right, and now why you joined today is an important day, is the information overload day, right? Later we will learn when it was created, because I know that Jonathan, you can tell us a little bit of history from it, but I would like first to share. This is a day where we cannot. It's not the day where we are overloaded, but it's actually the day where we can share more the importance of not being overloaded, right? So I'm Lele, your host today. Thank all everyone for joining. So before any start, any beginning, I would like to as well give the the speech to who one of the founders of IORG, somebody that was there at the beginning, but also that is our VP of research. So Jonathan Spira, thank you for being here. I'm gonna stop sharing so that you can be on the full screen. Thank you so much for opening our show today.
Yeah, well, thank you, Lele, for that kind introduction. I guess this really is the start then. Today is the 13th Information Overload Day, which was one of those things. I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning and said, why don't we create a holiday to cause awareness of information overload? I couldn't fall back asleep, so I started writing notes, and it was in late August, so October seemed like a good time period. And in the first few years, it took off like a bullet. Information overload has fascinated me personally in terms of how it has the ability to stop people dead in their tracks, to take their attention away, to reposition them in the wrong direction, and to leave them forgetting why they were doing whatever they were doing in the first place. It's such a powerful phenomenon, yet it lies largely in the unconscious. A few years after I came up with the crazy idea of Information Overload Day, we sat around and in a meeting at Microsoft, myself and Nathan Zeldis and some other people who would become founders of the Information Overload Research Group, and we created the Information Overload Research Group, to which I then seeded the idea of Information Overload Day as an extremely important connection between the two. Information overload costs the US economy alone $998 billion. The last time I conducted a full-blown survey, and it's only going up. Today we'll learn what we can do to achieve some sort of bargain with the devil. What can we do to really take hold of our own information lives and not let this blast 28% away, which is, by the way, what I calculated information overload costs us every day. I'll leave you with one final thought before turning it back to Lele. If you've ever finished the day and wondered where a third of the day went, I've just briefly explained it. It is insidious. And with that, I turn it back to Lele. Thank you.
Oh yeah. So it's part of, so you said it's part of memory as well, right? It's like it's impacting our memory, it's impacting how we work, what we do, and avoiding information overload is very important, right? Before proceeding, everybody here is able to unmute, to use the chat, right? So feel free to this is more of a cozy conversation as well. Please feel free to ask or put the question in the chat. I'm monitoring the chat every time, so that's why we're here. So one of the ways, right, to face information overload, also from in my personal experience, right, has always been with our mind, right? That's why today we dedicated the whole information overload day on one of the practices that I think could really make the difference, could really be, let's say, even to not say a word that is too strong, it could be life-changing experience for many. It's so we are talking about the practice of mindfulness that is impacting not only your overload, but many other aspects, right? So who better than Andy Lee here would be to talk about it, right? So Andy, I welcome you to our Information Overload Research group, and thank you for as well to come here in our day and in our event to talk a little bit about mindfulness at the beginning, and then we actually will try to join the two dots between information overload and mindfulness, and how can one of the practices help the other. So Andy, I met you a long time ago when you were still the Chief Mindfulness Officer at Aetna, right? But now I know that you are helping different organizations as well to create cultures and trying and success through the science-based programs through mindfulness as well, right? So working particularly in in Mindful Ethos, I think that you even founded it or you were part of it. So please share your screen, tell us something also about you that we don't know, and bring us into the world of mindfulness.
Thank you, Lele. And thanks to everyone who's here. It's such a pleasure to be here with you today and to share perhaps how mindfulness can be part of, I wouldn't say the solution, but maybe something that can to help us to manage the amount of information overload that we're experiencing every day. Can everybody see the title slide okay right now?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So this is a little bit more wordy than what Lele said, which is probably all that needed to be said. But what I want to talk about today is how this practice of mindfulness relates to information overload, how the two are connected, and how mindfulness can help to mitigate, as it says here, the effects, not just in one way, but in two ways. So I'm not sure how familiar people are here with mindfulness, but what I'd like to do is, before I describe really what it is, to ask you to join me in a mindfulness exercise, because that will make the rest of the conversation much more relatable and real. Okay, so is everybody okay with this? Can I see some thumbs up on this? Okay, I've got a couple of people that are willing, which is great. That's all we need. So here's what I'd like you to do. First of all, just take a posture that feels grounded and balanced. Okay, putting both of your feet flat on the floor and letting your spine be at its full height, elongating your spine so you're sitting at your full height. Let your hands rest in your lap. When you're ready, allowing your eyes to just gently close. Or, if you prefer, simply looking downwards with a soft and unfocused gaze. And taking a moment to notice your mood. Notice your level of energy right now. Perhaps notice how what you were just doing a minute ago is affecting your state of mind right now. And letting everything be just the way it is. No need to change anything. Just checking in with what's going on inside right now. And now noticing the fact that you're breathing. And letting your awareness rest on what it feels like to breathe naturally. Noticing the sensations of breathing, not needing to control the breath in any way, letting it be just as it is. And perhaps with each out breath, releasing a little bit of tension or energy that's not required right now. And letting your body settle a little bit more deeply into your chair or your seat with each out breath. And noticing what it feels like to breathe, perhaps noticing the sensations of breathing down in your belly as it expands and contracts. Noticing how your breath feels in the chest as it rises and falls. Perhaps noticing any sensations right at the tip of the nose, where the cool air is drawn in and the warm air is released again. And just for a few moments, resting in awareness of what it feels like to breathe, knowing that as you do this, it's natural to become distracted, to have thoughts come and go. When you notice that that happens, simply letting go of those thoughts and directing your attention back to the sensations of breathing, to the natural cadence of your breath. And now following 3 more cycles of the breath in and out of your body. And when you're ready, allowing your eyes to open again. Feeling free to give your body a little stretch or twist, whatever feels good right now. So I'll just invite people to perhaps put a word into chat in terms of what you noticed during that exercise, during that practice, if you choose, and perhaps how you feel now. Any thoughts about that? Okay. So what you experienced is not unusual at all. This was about 5 minutes. And this is often what happens when we practice mindfulness. And if this happens momentarily, as the result of a single practice. Another thing you can do, by the way, if you want to do this again, is check your iPhone, your Apple Watch. Check your heart rate before you do this practice and check it after. That's always a fun thing to do. But what you just experienced is the practice of mindfulness. Okay, and just to add a little bit more about this, simple definition I think is appropriate. This is how we describe it. Mindfulness is about paying attention to your present moment experience with an attitude of openness and curiosity. It's about bringing your awareness back into this moment, letting go of rehashing the past, rehearsing the future, and bringing your full attention to what's happening right here and now in this moment. And doing so with an attitude of openness, curiosity, acceptance, and non-judgment. Okay, not trying to change anything, simply being present with things as they are. Okay, that's a pretty simple definition of what we're talking about. Having said that, there are some misconceptions about mindfulness, which I'd just like to address The other thing that I would like to do is talk about mention the difference between mindfulness and meditation. What you just did is a mindfulness meditation exercise. Mindfulness is a quality that you can bring into any moment. Okay. Meditation is the exercise that you do to strengthen, to make mindfulness more accessible. It's just like going to the gym. If you want to have more strength and energy throughout the day, you do a workout in the morning. And this is your workout to being fully present and in the moment throughout the day. It doesn't happen overnight, but there is a definite connection. Mindfulness is not about tuning out. It's about tuning in to what's actually here. We didn't create anything. We didn't visualize anything. We just noticed what's already here. We noticed it selectively. It's not about being relaxed, because we can actually bring mindfulness into very stressful moments. And that's when it can perhaps be the most useful, honestly. It's not about stopping your thoughts. It's about changing your relationship to your thoughts so that you'll still have thoughts even when you meditate and obviously throughout the day, but perhaps creating a little bit of distance. So you can say, oh, there's a thought, instead of saying, this is what I believe and this is what needs to happen. We all know we have some great thoughts and some pretty dumb thoughts every day, and we naturally distinguish between them. This just builds that muscle again to say, I don't have to believe everything I think. I can have a sense of meta-awareness to evaluate my thoughts as well as just having them. And mindfulness is not about being passive, although the practice is passive. It often leads to a greater sense of energy and focus after we do the exercise. In terms of what mindfulness is, here's a list of the things that I think pretty much describe what we just experienced. Being perceptive and curious about internal states and also external circumstances. Being aware of your own thoughts and thought patterns, not just being subjected to them, but having a sense of awareness of them. Noticing your own emotional state and working with it skillfully. And pausing, instead of pausing before you take an action, so that you are able to respond to a situation instead of reacting. Okay. So hopefully this is just a very brief overview of what mindfulness is about. If you have any questions, feel free to put them into chat. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and move on to the connections that we want to make today. So the first thing that I want to acknowledge is that I want to point to is that information overload does not just affect how we think, it affects how we feel, right? It causes stress. And this is probably not a surprise to anyone here. We've all experienced this. But sometimes it's tempting to think that information overload simply messes with our decision making. But it's more complicated than that. And here are just a couple of quotes. The second one from research done on emergency worker managers of emergency response teams. And they said basically what Jonathan said at the beginning, that stress, that information overload can freeze us, but it also mentions that it greatly increases the amount of stress that people experience. So this is the way that one could think of the impact of information overload, that it increases our stress and it also interferes with our cognitive functioning. But I think the link that's missing here, which is very important, is this one. That stress actually also has a direct effect on your cognitive functioning. So we know this intuitively. This may be, you may talk about this all the time, but I think that it's important definitely to understand this when we talk about how mindfulness can be helpful in working with information overload. So let's talk about stress for a minute, okay? How does this work, and how does it, what's kind of the physiology behind stress? Again, very briefly, the process is that we perceive a situation that is stressful, which means it's something that can be challenging to us. We're not sure if we can deal with it, and I think information overload is a great example. Oh my God, I have to make a decision, and I've got 10,000 things I need to consider. So that situation is often generally perceived as a stressful situation for people. What happens when we perceive a stressor of any sort is that it activates our parasympathetic nervous system. And that releases adrenaline and cortisol into your body. And it has a lot of physiological effects that affect not only your physical well-being, but also your how you think. Okay? Short term, this is not a bad thing, because this is an evolutionary response. If we experience something stressful, perhaps from an evolutionary perspective, it might be a lion who's hunting us. And the short-term effects of stress is that we start paying very close attention. We start scanning our environment for stressors. We notice things that are going wrong, because those are the things that could really pose a stress to us. And we become more emotionally reactive. We become more ready to act on threats than we usually would. Okay, we're basically just tensing up and ready to go to take on whatever's happening. in the short term, this is perhaps not the best way to make, not the best emotional state to make a decision. But it gets worse when we look at the effects of chronic stress. Okay, when this becomes the brain and the body's new normal, these are the things that research shows we begin to experience. Okay, because short-term effects, acute stressors will come and go. However, if we have a number of acute stressors or a lot of acute stressors that occur regularly, perhaps like a job that overloads us with information regularly, this will become a default. This will become kind of a new normal. Okay. And these are the effects on the mind of chronic stress. We're not even talking about the health effects right now. Okay. And we're not even going to talk about them, as a matter of fact. So, how can mindfulness help us now that we know this part of the role that stress plays in the effects of information overload? How can mindfulness address this? Well, the great thing is that mindfulness actually addresses both of these relationships. Mindfulness can reduce our stress, which also improves our cognitive functioning, and it also directly improves our cognitive functioning. And there's research on all of these links. Okay, probably the easiest one to connect with is this one: is that mindfulness does reduce our stress. It can take us out of activation of the sympathetic nervous system. That's right, the sympathetic, and put us into the parasympathetic nervous system activation. Correct. I may have had that wrong on the other slide. Apologies. Creates greater resilience, improved mood, and improved ability to relax and to sleep. Okay. But what does that do to our cognitive functioning? Well, when mindfulness reduces stress, it also reduces this connection. And this is basically just the inverse of what we saw earlier. As your stress comes down, we become, we're less likely to ruminate. We are more able to focus. Our working memory improves. Our cognitive flexibility improves. And our willpower, our response inhibition also improves. There's also studies that show that, well, I'll leave that until later. The other link, though, is on this side, there's been a lot of research done on regular people, or as regular as they get for psychology experiments and workplace experiments, that shows that that mindfulness can enhance cognitive functioning in people who are just experiencing a normal level of stress. Okay, mindfulness has been shown to improve the allocation of cognitive resources. It makes your brain work more efficiently when it notices its environment and works with information. It improves working memory and attentional control. And this is demonstrated by some very fundamental techniques. There's something called the Stroop test. I don't know if anyone is familiar with the Stroop test. I see some nods. It's where the name of a color is shown. Like you'll see the word red on your screen, but the word itself is written in a blue font. And you're asked to tick off what color is the font. Okay, so your brain has to juggle these things and figure out what the right response is, because you're tempted to respond in two ways, or perhaps in the way that's less obvious. Mindfulness improves performance on the Stroop test, which is a very foundational measure of cognitive effectiveness. Another one is called the N-back test, where you repeat a number of digits or a number of letters to someone, and every time you repeat a digit or a letter, you ask them to repeat back to you the one that you had mentioned to them 2 times earlier, which means like the 2-back test or the 3-back test, the N-back test. And that's a very direct measure of working memory. Okay, the better you do on an N-back test, the more effectively your cognitive, your short-term memory is working. So, these are the 2 paths by which mindfulness can improve cognitive functioning in a way that can help you to, number one, manage the stress that that information overload can cause, and number 2, enhance your cognitive functioning separately in a way that can help you to parse through too much information and perhaps make it just a little bit easier to find the information that you're looking for to sift through it in a way that will help you to actually make decisions more effectively. Okay, I'm almost at the end, so please, if you have any questions, go ahead and type them in now, or prepare to just unmute and share them. Just to summarize, the direct effect: mindfulness improves attention, focus, and working memory. Also reduces cognitive biases and enhances decision making. So, for instance, cognitive biases, there's been interesting research done on something called the sunk cost, the sunk cost bias, which was something that came out of the work on behavioral economics. People who fall for the sunk cost bias this is the situation. When do you decide when to put more money into fixing an old car versus saying, I'm going to sell it if you really like it? Where do you decide that you don't want to throw good money after bad? In a business situation, when do you decide to abandon a project that you've already invested a lot in? It's human nature to want to see something through, to make how much you invested in it a measure of how much you should still stick to it in the future. When, of course, those things are completely separate. Because no matter what you do, you're not going to recoup your investment. And the real question is, what do I do now? And research has shown that people who practice mindfulness are less subject to the sunk cost bias than people who don't. Also, research has shown that people who practice mindfulness are less discriminate less in online games, and are less biased in online games than they do if they don't practice mindfulness. So there's a number of different streams of research that suggest that mindfulness really helps us to reduce, as was said earlier, as Jonathan mentioned, a lot of these practices are subconscious. But if we practice mindfulness, it can help us to bring them into our conscious awareness, if not necessarily our conscious control. Okay. There's also the indirect effect that mindfulness reduces stress and increases resilience, which mitigates the negative effects of stress, and especially chronic stress, on cognition. When you're stressed, you're not going to make your best decisions. Okay. There's ample evidence to show that. And mindfulness can help to reduce the stress and enhance your decision making and your thinking overall. Okay. So just to leave you with a couple of thoughts on what this means to you, you might think about trying out a mindfulness meditation practice, just 10 to 15 minutes daily. Do it for 2 weeks, 10 minutes for 10 days, perhaps, or maybe 10 minutes for 2 weeks, and see for yourself. See if you notice any difference. That's the best, at the end of the day, we can read about the impact on thousands of participants and experiment subjects. The bottom line is, what does it do for me? And it is a very easy way to find out. Also, throughout the day, pause to check in with yourself. Just take those 3 breaths and say, how am I feeling? Do I need a drink of water? Am I completely dehydrated or distracted or frazzled? What's my mood? Am I frustrated? Am I relaxed? Am I joyful? Or am I worried? Am I in the process of regretting something? And how is this affecting my work? Mindfulness won't necessarily change your mood in the moment, but it'll make it more easy to access and will help you to use that information in a wise way. Okay? And then ask yourself, what am I working on? And what is the best use of my time? As Jonathan said, we often don't do this during the day. We just keep plowing ahead. And if we can just pull back, take a couple of breaths and say, okay, how did I end up, on Amazon looking for, a foot washer? Or how did I get here? And is this really what I want to be doing right now? It's a simple practice of coming into stillness, letting go of activity, taking a couple of deep breaths, and just bringing awareness into how are things going for me and what am I actually doing. And then just a plug for someone else's book. Amishi Jha has done a lot of research on mindfulness and attention. She's done a lot of work with the U.S. military. She's shown that mindfulness actually has a prophylactic effect on cognitive well-being. It shows that as people get more stressed before they're approaching deployment, their cognitive functioning decreases. However, if they practice mindfulness, it doesn't diminish, even as stress builds ahead of a deployment. And she's done a lot of other research on how we can use mindfulness to enhance our attention and our focus. So that's what I have for you. It was pretty quick, but it looks like I've kind of hit the mark in terms of where I wanted to be time-wise. And very looking forward to the discussion that this might generate. So thank you for your attention.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Andy. I think there are so many benefits, right? So many direct effects that I really wonder what is passing in the mind of our audience here, right? So please, whatever question you have, like Marty did, like post it in the chat, right? But before going to the question, right, I maybe want to make really the connection that I think, since we have a lot of engineers as well in our audience, right? So if we want to connect, right, the practice we did at the beginning with the direct and indirect effect, what is the connection? Like, why practicing mindfulness, focusing on the breath and sitting down, closing the eyes is really giving all these benefits? So what is the system there?
So how does mindfulness work, in other words?
Yeah.
Is that right? Well, it does a number of things. One thing that it does is, as we practice mindfulness, as you focus on an object of awareness, such as the breath, or it can be something else. It can be the sounds in the room. It can be the sensations in your feet. Allow your attention to rest on one sensory experience. And by doing that, you're training your mind to stay in one place. Okay. And then your mind will naturally wander off. When you notice it's wandered, you bring it back. Okay. That is exactly how we build our capacity to stay present and stay focused. The other part of it is the acceptance piece, to notice things just as it is, because a lot of times the noise that's created in our minds is about judging ourselves, about trying to evaluate every piece of information that we see, instead of simply taking it for what it is. Letting go of that constant discourse that we have in our minds. Mindfulness can as the mind begins to settle in a state of a more stable awareness, those discourses will start to slow down a little bit. But more importantly, you'll be able to recognize when they're happening. And as I said, create that sense of distance to say, oh yeah, I'm thinking about that meeting tomorrow, and that's okay. But I'm not going to let it dominate my mind. I know that that's where I'm going to go occasionally, but I'm not going to let it take up all of my mental energy. So it's a combination of enhancing your ability to pay attention and being able to take distractions, which mostly honestly come from within our own minds, and work with them in a more skillful way.
If I can jump in for a moment.
Go ahead.
I plan to. First, Andy, thank you so much. But I wanted to point out that I've found it quite useful to practice mindfulness by setting reminders on my Apple Watch to automatically prompt me for a mindfulness breathing exercise. I've been doing that pretty much since the Apple Watch was introduced in 2014, and I find it a very valuable respite to whatever is going on. I think that without the Downton Abbey equivalent of the dressing gong going off to remind you that you have to do mindfulness, it's a nice haptic tap on the wrist, literally. And I'd say 80% of the time I'm able to stop and do it. And the interesting thing is I sort of feel regretful when I'm in the midst of something that I really can't stop. It's rare, but I feel regretful that I can't, and I try and bring up the app. I organize the apps on the phone to display mindfulness first, so I can always go back to it. So there's, I think, tremendous value in doing that. I also noticed, by the way, It does help lower my blood pressure. And it's good for our overall well-being. I think well-being, I'll just close so everyone else can speak, but I believe that information overload has a tremendously detrimental effect on our overall health and well-being, as well as our mental health. In years to come, I really wonder when BuzzFeed or someone makes a list of things we did, in the past decade that we thought were healthy, that later this is in maybe the year 2040, they're saying, Warren, were things like doom scrolling and social media and an attachment so you couldn't, live away from the device. When I do keynotes, I tell the audience to take out the phone. Then I ask, do you know where the off button is? Most people sort of know, and they say, well, great. Well, would you press it now? And the look of horror on people's faces when I actually tell them to press, do you want me to do what? Is really, I just scared the dog. It's just worth it. I do it more for, I don't care if they turn it on or off. It's for that specific point that I asked them to. I'll shut up now then.
Thank you, Jim. I think you make an interesting point here too, because at least in our information, overload experience, right? I always see there are two ways to kind of, tackle that. One is human side, right? That is, using tools like mindfulness and so on. And the other one is IT side, that is leveraging from notification, kind of software and system and so on, right? So with mindfulness, how would I need a mindfulness reminder? Or does it also help to, kind of organize our time management? Is that one of the benefits?
It could be. It is. However, what we need to do is we need to use every resource available. So I would really encourage people to do something similar to what Jonathan is doing, if you're amenable to it. In terms of the sources, I'd like to recommend another book called Stolen Focus, which talks about all the things, by Jonathan Haar, talks about all the things that are happening in our society that are stealing our ability to focus. And the first thing that he mentions is just to remember that there are thousands of people that are smarter than most of the people in this room, getting paid a lot of money to have you be endlessly distracted while using their online instruments.
That doesn't make them smarter, that makes them more evil, no?
Yes, they're probably orthogonal, I hope at least. But the point is that this is not, we have to also be careful about blaming the victim. And I think you guys are good in that way, because you're talking about there's too much information out there. The problem is not that our minds aren't working efficiently. There are people actively working on trying to keep us overwhelmed and distracted while using their apps. So given that, if we can use technology, to push back in terms of reminders and planners, I think we need to use everything we can.
I would retitle my book from overload, how too much information is hazardous to your organization, to how too much information is hazardous to your mental health right now, if I were redoing the title.
Yeah.
I mean, the book speaks to that anyway, but I would just change the title. But
yeah, and I know that Lori's had her hand up for a while.
Yeah, Lori, go ahead.
You're on mute.
Ask you to unmute. Okay.
Hi everyone. Andy, thank you so much. That was so helpful and so interesting to me that somebody could be a chief mindfulness officer at a corporation. I'm really intrigued. I'm curious. I'm a meditator, and I totally have seen how my life has been transformed by meditation. However, I tried meditating since 2014, like on and off, on and off, on and off. It's really hard to develop that type of practice where you'll really start to become aware and see your thought patterns and start to be able to actively make changes. And I wonder, are there other mindfulness ways and I have a 24-year-old daughter, and has no focus, like a lot of stress. And, for her to learn to meditate is kind of a bit of a big on-ramp. And so meditation isn't for everyone, right? So the question is, like, are there other mindfulness ways to cultivate mindfulness, ways that could be on-ramped before people start to sit down on a daily basis? So anyway.
There's so many ways that we could do this. And they're not going to be particularly surprising, I don't think. One is, for instance, to immerse yourself in a hobby or an activity that you truly enjoy, that takes you off of the online world. To walk in nature, okay? And there's actually research to support these things. Physical exercise as well, running, for instance. And so, you can just actually think about your own experience and say, what gives me a sense of presence and balance? And, for me, it's walking my dog. I walk my dog twice a day during the workday, and it's great for me. Or before I do a presentation, I walk around the block and physically carry the presentation around with me. It works, In terms of formal practices, breathing, I think, breath work, as it's known now, can be extremely helpful. Doesn't have all the benefits of mindfulness, but simply learning how to breathe. And there's a book that can help you on that called Breath by
James Nestor. Love it.
Thank you. Simply taking deep breaths and activating all of your full lungs can do a lot to physiologically take you out of fight or flight mode very quickly. And activate a less stressful state of mind in literally a minute or two. So that's another great practice that you can use if you don't have time to meditate, or if that's the story you're telling yourself.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because for me, it's more, okay, I found this. How do I start to bring it to the people I work with, to the people I live with, right? And as the Chief Mindfulness Officer of a huge corporation, I'm sure you've seen all types of people. And I think it's just really being able to find the on-ramp for people based on their styles, which I think is probably more of an art than a science. So thank you.
Lori, what I usually tell to everyone that is in IBM willing to practice mindfulness is I compare always with sport, right? And mindfulness is like a sport for your mind, right? And there are so many sports in the world. Like I like basketball, maybe Andy likes tennis, I don't know. And we are all practicing, right? So the same is for mindfulness. You just need to try them all or try many and figure out what works for you. Right?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great metaphor. That's great.
There is a question from Marty actually in the chat. So during a typical 8-hour workday, how frequent and for how long each mindfulness session should be done to maintain a strong focus on task?
Well, the best amount of time to spend during the day doing these practices is the amount of time that you will actually do them, instead of saying this is the perfect amount and then never get to them. So doing 1 minute is much better than knowing that 10 minutes is ideal and never doing 10 minutes. Having said that, research by Amishi Jha suggests that between 10 and 15 minutes a day will make a noticeable difference. My personal practice is 30 minutes a day in the morning, and then whenever I can, another 10 or 15 minutes in the evening. And what I find is if you do it twice a day, even short periods of time, it has a much deeper effect. But a great place to start is 10 minutes a day. And after that, everybody's different. You can make your own decisions. Mindfulness is about exploring. It's about noticing what works, not taking anybody's word for anything, being curious and receptive to your own experience, and your own experience will tell you what works for you.
Lily, to add to Andy's question, let me do this quickly because we have lots of hands up. part of my research that led me to information overload had to do with interruptions, unnecessary interruptions in particular. And my findings were that every interruption came with something I called recovery time. Recovery time is the time it takes you to get back to where you were, which is, and I found it to be 10 to 20 times the duration of the interruption. Hence a 30-second interruption could be a 5-minute or more penalty. And it's all unconscious. You're not sitting there saying, is my recovery time over? So part of that, a way of countering it is both eliminating interruptions, but also creating a mindfulness atmosphere, which I do by, I always have soft classical music. I usually listen to the radio station Radio Swiss Classic in the background because they don't speak really except to just say what was just played. That creates, I don't know if this is technically correct, but I call it a mindfulness atmosphere in which to work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes.
When you go running, you just put on your shoes, you get ready, you have your watch and phone, right? That's very similar way to approach it. Andy, you were saying, sorry.
Just quickly, and then we'll move to Nathan's question.
Yeah.
Building on that, one thing that you can do that's very helpful is to not multitask. Okay, whenever you can, don't try to do more than one thing at a time. Not only is it it creates more stress, creates errors, more shallow thinking, but you're basically teaching your mind how to not pay attention. You're teaching your mind how to jump from one thing to another. You're teaching it a very bad habit. So not only is it not helpful in the moment, but it's training it's basically the inverse of mindfulness.
So you become worse in focusing even, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Andy and I could have a long conversation about multitasking, so let's move on.
Yeah, Nathan.
Nathan, go ahead.
Okay, well, what I wanted to ask is this business of being chief mindfulness officer in a large corporation and presumably working with other corporations. I'm curious what resistance you see from management and how you overcome it so you can bring the advantages to the people, because I'm sure the people love it, but we know how managers are.
First of all, just to be clear, I am no longer with Aetna. I'm no longer their chief mindfulness officer. As a result of CVS buying Aetna and reorganizing things, I'm happy to say that one of the people on my team is still there and still leading their mindfulness efforts. Having said that, it really depends widely on the culture of the organization. As a consultant, what I've done is what you can do is simply, what I find helpful is to simply convince human resources or someone to do a pilot, to test, to say, let's just do a mindfulness class and see if anybody shows up, and then see what the ratings are, and then track the effectiveness. And then people may reluctantly say, okay, let's give that a try, because it's hard to argue against that, right? And then generally people are very surprised by the number of people that come and the positive feedback that they receive. And that will help a lot to convince managers. There's also a lot of research that you can quote. One of the most effective things I find is actually quotes from feedback on mindfulness programs. If you read someone on your team or an employee in your company saying, this is the best thing that I've done in 3 years, it's really helped me to de-stress. That one quote is worth reams of research. And you will get that feedback if you do this, if you teach properly.
Thank you.
Yeah, Ilyana.
There is a question from Ilyana. Yes, Ilyana, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. First of all, Andy, thank you so much for your talk. It was really interesting. Also, I love the intersection of information overload and mindfulness, so thank you. I also wanted to say something in regards to Laurie's comment. With the meditation, this is actually something I experienced. I'd been meditating for a very long time, but actually when it came to mindfulness and its application in my daily life, I found that I've done so many retreats, I've done it all. And then you have this calm, kind of the sense of calm that you take into your daily life and then it's gone. So actually my original solution, which actually turned into my company in the end, was to use physical tools kind of as a way to, I guess, have a conscious action and kind of also make it a bit more playful. So for example, with the phone and focus, it would be to actively put the phone into a pouch, not just a drawer, but a pouch, and to say, okay, this is my time where I'm focusing now. And because it's kind of this proactive action and it's your environment kind of taking the phone out of sight. For example, those were just some things that I tried out, or having, you know, kind of a specific place where you eat and making that a mindful, kind of a mindful place to eat. So it's introducing these rituals that help you. And this is actually, I guess, a question I had for Andy as well, kind of how your environment, if there are other ways that you feel, because there's so much capacity we have to be mindful to all the information, but what do you think we can do to our environment to help us not have to be, you know, actively, I don't want to say fighting it, but not, you know, I guess take some of the load off our minds.
I think you mentioned some great things. Jonathan mentioned classical music in the background. If there's something in the background where people aren't speaking, and it can help to kind of normalize the background in a way. It does. I don't know if there's been a lot of research done on it, but it has shown in some places, I believe, that it can be soothing and can help ease the ability to focus. Blocking out time during the day to work on a particular task. Okay. Getting off of Slack, getting off of collaboration platforms, turning off IM notifications, making a part of your meal something that you engage in with all of your senses and let go of other things, to simply notice how your food tastes. It's really about doing one thing at a time and doing it with intention. And if you look at it, that's, Ileana, I think that's what many of these things have in common, is being able to fully appreciate and be present with one aspect of your experience so that you can, you know, appreciate and work with it and learn from it, let it teach you. Those are just some ideas, but I think you're on the right track.
Could I ask one more thing? I mean, I don't know how others are feeling about this, but I'm finding that sometimes there's a lot of pressure for you to just be doing so many things in one day. So I guess this is the reason why people would end up multitasking. How would you advise to handle this pressure to be on the subway, and rather than to just be present in the moment saying, okay, I can like finish these notes now? Is it like literally we have to be very self-disciplined, or is this kind of the only option for us?
I don't know if there's an easy question to that, but you bring up another point, which is that often we not intentionally, but we're collaborators with our oppressors in a way. I would ask you to think about how many of the meetings on your calendar are meetings that you set up. How many of those meetings are really important? We outsource to our devices and to our calendars and our email where our attention should go. And I think it's really helpful at work to have some kind of gateway to say, just because it's here, do I have to respond to it? Just because it needs to be done, do I have to do it right now? Just because somebody wants to meet with me, is that the best use of my time to meet with them? It's about taking that control back, right? And mindfulness can create those moments where you say, oh, why am I going to this meeting? Where otherwise you just be like, oh, I've got all these meetings I have to go to. And you never really question the fact that you're doing it because you're so deep into autopilot, into just responding in whatever's in front of you and thinking that faster is going to be better and just keep going full speed. And somehow that's the most effective way to get through the day, which I think if we think about it, we all know is not the case.
Andy, one of the things I found in my research is that people today have a problem differentiating between urgent, important, and none of the above.
Yes.
That something I delved into greatly in my research on my book. But to
Mhm.
speak to what Alana was saying, I wanted to mention, I always sometimes liken dealing with information overload as portion control. I'm Viennese. That means that I should naturally have a great difficulty with portion control when it comes to eating Sachertorte or any interesting patisserie. But I'm actually good at just taking a fork or two of it, you know, if that's all I want. And I think that in information overload, you need to take what you want and what you need, not all that's presented to you. There's so much information out there that's on the table, that on the buffet table, that you can't possibly take that. It's a fire hose, as
Mhm.
we're fond of
Mhm.
saying. So
Right.
if you practice portion control, and one other thing to Alana's question, years ago when BlackBerry was a thing, Mike Lazar, I'm going to mispronounce his name, Lazidis, because I haven't spoken to him in ages. He's one of the co-founders of BlackBerry, said to me, is I did a short video on the interruptions, and he said, looked into the camera and he held up a BlackBerry and he said, you know, people forget these things have an off button. And that was years before we were talking about information overload in this vein. I'd barely scratched the surface, but he's right. He was right. And I love that one pull-out quote from what he said. People forget these things have an off button.
Yeah, that's true, John. It's true, but yeah, I mean, you made the point earlier. Do people even know where that off button is? Is there something that comes up on your screen that says, "Do you want to turn me off?" You know?
No,
Not
it says,
so
do you want
much.
to turn me on? No.
And another thing is that we need to remember is that this is also, distractions are also part of the way we're wired. Every time you send an email, it feels good. You get a little you get a little dopamine hit. It feels like you're getting things done because if you're doing things quickly, you're moving through them and you're getting immediate gratification. And one thing that mindfulness can help us to do is research has shown, is to loosen that connection, that craving for immediate gratification, a little bit. But having said that, we need to recognize that this, it's in our human nature to be distracted. So whatever tool we can use is going to be helpful.
We didn't always need such immediate gratification. I blame Fred Smith, the founder of Federal Express, with the slogan, when you absolutely positively want to have it overnight. Because, if you may laugh, but people patiently waited for mail orders that they mailed to Chicago or Milwaukee or wherever the company was, and a week or two later, now you send for something, and if it's not on your desk or at your house at 10 o'clock in the next morning, you're frantically on the app searching where the devil the truck is. Yeah. So there's the instant gratification has become too much of a thing, and that's one of the things I think, Andy, that mindfulness really helps you step back from.
Yeah, Nina, over to you.
Yeah, actually,
You have a question?
I have one comment and a question for Andy. Andy,
Sure.
Thank you very much for a nice presentation. The comment is that I don't know whether you all do or not, because we get distracted all the time, definitely, but there are easily distracted, especially it happens when the work that you have at hand is something that you don't feel like doing it. You cannot put your mind in. Okay, I come up with some sort of a reward system. So basically, if I do it, then I'm going to get myself something, whether it's edible or not edible, I give that reward system to myself to overcome the something I do not want so that I can focus. That's what I could share. And about the question, Andy, I have is that these are all our individual level behavioral habits, right? How do we can collate it and transcend it at the organization level to, like in organization, not everybody is going to participate in any kind of program wholeheartedly, because it's a group, it's a mass, psych. So how could you influence that mass psych?
I'll answer this very quickly, Leila, because I think we're at time. What I
Last
would do
question,
is,
this was.
yeah, what I would do is just start with the people who are already interested. Don't worry about getting everybody. Let that be a question for another day, and make it available for those who are. Start with where the energy is, and then watch it expand.
Yeah, nice. And we didn't also mention, like, one of the benefits of mindfulness for me, like in our maybe dream of me and Andy, is if everybody would practice mindfulness, there would be much more care for each other, connection, and so many of the mutual overload would also not exist anymore, I would say, right? So it's a different type of world there could be if there would be a bit more attention to everyone. Thank you so much, Andy, for being here, and for everyone to attend today. And I would like Nathan, anything we should close our event with, right? You are our president, please. You're honored to close the event and send everyone.
I won't hold you longer, actually. I have to point out that we've been in existence, IORG, for 15 years, and I'm sad to report that we have failed to completely eliminate information overload in the world. That said, we are seeing that the problem is morphing almost like the COVID virus, because it's taking advantage of all these new communication tools and channels and apps and so on. On the other hand, our response as people is improving, and we're seeing more action. We used to be all about computer applications and things. Now we're talking about focus and mindfulness and other coping strategies. So this definitely is going to continue to be interesting. And with this, I thank you for joining the event. I ask you to please, before you leave, click on the link that I put in the chat and answer 3 questions in the survey that will pop up for you to help us improve in the future. And we also encourage you to leave us your email and name in there so we can remain in touch as necessary. Thank you, and have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Enjoy
you.
your day.
Bye.
Thank you for coming. And thank you, Lele. Bravo.
Always a pleasure.